GAHAP certification program. Outlined as one of the GAHAP requirements is the section on antibiotic registration, prescription, dispensing, and usage at the feed mill and farm operation. It also prohibits the use of banned antibiotics and substances in animal production. Thus, as the case of multi-resistant bacteria increase and the risk of antimicrobial resistance in human put pressure to both the animal production and food service sector, it is imperative that as farmers, we focus seriously to these pressing matters and start to implement changes in our respective operations. We may start by reviewing the antibiotic usage of our operation and define if it is used primarily for growth promotion, prevention, or treatment. And then, if we are really serious about reducing antibiotic usage in our operation, then take the necessary actions to do so. The first step is to incorporate this in our vision, mission, goals, and objectives. It's either formally or informally. Then draw up action plans and timeline to achieve the goals. Based on personal experiences, embarking on a program to reduce the use of antibiotics involves a well-thought and comprehensive review of not only the internal farm operation, but also the effect of external suppliers and support, which will be part and parcel of the final product. This program must take in consideration the breeder source of the hatching eggs, the hatchery, the feed mill, growing farms, up to the processing plant. And in between this operation will be the tracking and logistics, which all plays a vital role in the program. The use of antibiotic at the farm level is directly affected by the following factors: nutrition, chick quality, environment, biosecurity, animal health programs, and management. Each and every factors and the operations involved must be looked into and identify elements which will help reduce animal health concern necessitating the use of antibiotic. The first factor we will be talking about is nutrition. Some assume that the problems brought about by the feed are related with the formulation and nutrition of the feeds. Although a balanced formulation indeed plays a vital role in animal production, there are other things to consider in the manufacturing of a good quality feed. A good formulation must be translated into good quality feed. This will start with the selection and acceptance process of raw materials, both macro and micro, the proper storage of such materials, and the first in, first out procedure. We must maintain the quality of these materials to lower down contamination risk. The physical characteristic of the feeds and the manufacturing process involved in attaining the set standard, in particular ration, is critical. This may include the pellet durability, the grits profile, and moisture content of the feeds. Keeping the fines percentage at a minimum is necessary. Programs to reduce the risk of contamination must also be in place. This will include the feed mill biosecurity programs, the salmonella program, and all of the quality assurance procedures like mycotoxin testings. Also, the feed mill must have a periodic sanitation and maintenance of the mill and the building structure. These procedures must be logged, monitored, and evaluated and changed if needed. The second factor in nutrition is water and water quality. This input, in my opinion, is the most neglected ingredient in the farm operation. The bird's requirement of water is at least twice of its requirement of feed. However, the assurance of providing adequate, clean, safe, and acceptable quality has always been overlooked. The first requirement whenever we build a farm must be the adequate supply of water, particularly during the summer season. In choosing the farm location, this should be a priority in the list. We also have to check the bacteriological and physiochemical characteristic of the water supply so that we can make necessary steps we need to do to make sure that the water quality is acceptable. After which, sanitation program must be in place. Periodic cleaning, monitoring, and end-of-cycle maintenance are necessary steps to ensure that the system will deliver adequate, clean, safe, and acceptable quality water to the birds. Next factor is chick quality. The definition of good chick quality may differ from operation to operation. But what is important is that a set standard must be in place to define chick quality and the necessary steps to do to make sure that this standard is set and maintained by all of the parties involved. Achieving and maintaining the standard chick quality starts with the breeder source of the hatching eggs, then the hatchery, the chick transport, and the accepting farm. The chick quality standard must be understood by these operations to ensure the participation of each segment. The reduction in contamination risk must be the primary consideration. Monitoring of bacteriological, viral, and protozoal challenges should be part of the operating procedures for each segment. Also, the choice of antibiotics used in the breeder operation must always be different from the antibiotics used at the grow-out facilities. Then, we have the factor of the environment. Both the external, which is the macro environment, and the internal, which is the local and the micro environment. The microenvironment plays an important role in the farm layout, house design, and ventilation system to use in the farm operation. This is to ensure a good internal environment. Since it is not possible to control the macro environment, the choices for these three factors must address challenges brought about by it. Isolation is also an important consideration when choosing farm location. The farther the farm from other farm facilities and residential community, the lesser the risk for contamination. Structures to address issues on water, air, and land contamination must also be included in the farm design. These facilities and equipment must have periodic maintenance and part replacement to ensure good working condition at all times. Another vital part of farm operation that is always viewed as an expense is biosecurity. However, this negative cost connotation always leads to economic losses for the farm. It is about time that we take a serious look in our biosecurity protocols and make sure that we have adequate measures and programs for disease prevention. The biosecurity program has a process cycle. It starts with written plans and programs to prevent entry of diseases in the operation. These programs must be properly cascaded to all personnel through continuous training. Monitoring must be done to ensure the correct implementation of the programs. From time to time, the program must be audited and assessed to check if there's a need to modify the program according to changes instituted in the operation. All of the players in the operation, internal or external, must fully comprehend the impact of their participation in the biosecurity program. It must be clear to all parties that biosecurity is interdependent to each particular aspect of the operation, and omission done along the process will impact the whole program. The next factor that we will be talking about is the Animal Health Program. Animal health starts with the disease prevention as end in mind. Health programs are designed to minimize the risk of pathogen contamination and economic impact of a disease. Disease prevention is also involved in feed formulation. Feed additives aimed at improving nutrient utilization, animal well-being, enhancing performance, parasite control, and even insect control may be included in the formulation. Feed sanitation to prevent the growth of bacterial and fungal pathogen is also important. At the farm level, the medicine, vaccination, and supplementation program must be tailor-fitted to address the individual farm concerns. Ideally, the program must be reviewed every quarter and changed if necessary according to the challenges brought about by the seasons. Monitoring of bacterial, viral, fungal, and protozoal threat is very important. Diagnostic tests must be done periodically, particularly antibody titer baselining through ELISA for viral challenges, bacterial isolation mainly for E. coli and Salmonella, bacteriological test for water, mycotoxin level testing at the feed mill, also through ELISA, and antibiotic sensitivity test or AST. Antibiotics, probiotics, prebiotics, and nutraceutical can coexist in a given program or formulation. And again, each individual farm have its own set of challenges. Thus, the combination, timing, and duration of the program will vary accordingly. At present, there are available products in the market which the operation may use as alternative to AGPs. These products work on different mechanisms of action and if used in combination will enhance the animal well-being through maintenance of gut integrity, immunomodulation, and even as an antibacterial or antiviral agents. These products includes enzymes, probiotics, prebiotics, plant extract, essential oils, vitamins, minerals, and peptide. The next factor would be management. In the triangle of successful farming, the aspect of management is the most challenging factor to tackle. To achieve performance goals, aside from flock management, people management must also be given priority. Since the farm personnel are the implementers of all the farm procedures, it is imperative that management put the welfare of the people first in the priority list. The skills of stockmanship must be taught and constantly improved. The operation must have a written standard operating procedures, and this must be cascaded through training and continuous education. To make sure that these procedures are implemented, target performance parameters must be set and cascaded. Key Performance Index, or KPI, and Key Result Areas, or KRAs, must be understood by all of the personnel. Periodic audit and assessment must be done and discussed with the personnel to give them feedback on things to improve and areas of concern. And lastly, innovative technology. In the advent of modern farming, we need to keep up with the technology. Improvement in the animal's genetics requires precision management. Data analytics is a new set of skill we need to acquire. Hand in hand with our five senses in stockmanship would be the tools to monitor environmental condition, chick comfort, and input quality. Thus, these are all the factors that we need to take up so that we can review properly the use of antibiotics at the farm level. After knowing the factors affecting the usage of antibiotics, we may now sit down and draft a plan in reducing antibiotic usage in our operation. This will be a team effort, and the operation must have the drive, commitment, and dedication in reducing antibiotic use. First, the objectives or what we want to achieve must be defined. Then there should be a planned effort to achieve the objective. The management must take a firm decision and rally for the concerted effort of everyone. Also, the management must be willing to spend time, energy, and resources towards achieving the objective. Hence, here are the steps in reducing antibiotic in your operation. The first thing to do is decide on your objectives. Then, draw up a plan and identify people who will be responsible for this particular plan. Put up a check and monitoring system to monitor the system. Cascade and institutionalize through trainings and continuous education. And then, every now and then, review and assess, and change if necessary, and then repeat. And that ends my presentation. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mapa. The second paper to be presented for this afternoon's broiler session is The Importance of Strong Immune Foundation in Layer Health and Production.
Thank you, Dr. Mapa. An antibiotic-free future is something we all look forward to. However, to achieve it is not that simple, but involves a comprehensive program in all aspects of production. Now for our next speaker. He earned the degree of veterinary surgeon at the University of Paraná, Brazil. He earned his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Hanover, Germany, and earned his degree of Poultry Specialist at Utrecht, the Netherlands. He worked as the Global Technical Director at MSD Animal Health in 1988 up to 2013, and Global Technical Manager at Boehringer Ingelheim Veterinarica in 2013 up to 2019. Recently, he conducted several poultry courses in GD in the Netherlands. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Global Poultry Technical Consultant, Dr. Aristoteles Malo.
Hello, my name is Aris Malo, and today I am going to talk about the importance of a strong immune foundation in layer health and production. In this regard, I will be talking about infectious bursal disease, also known as Gumboro disease and Marek's disease. First, a few words about the avian immune system, and we have to start in young birds. In young birds, we will find two important primary organs. These are the thymus, which is found alongside the neck and consists of several lobes. And this is the place where the T-type of cell will develop and mature. We will find at the rear side of the bird the Bursal fabricius nearby the cloaca, and this is the organ in which the B type of cells will mature. Later on, these cells will be distributed along the body of the birds, and we will find conglomerates of cells, for example, in the head, in the gut, in the respiratory tract, and in the spleen. So we have to regard the immune system as an orchestra in which all the instruments have to be fine-tuned in order to get music. So all the processes have to work accordingly as expected in order to have a well-functioning immune system. We will have the T cells, the B cells, we have natural killer cells, phagocytic cells like macrophages, granulocytes, and there will be soluble factors that will modulate the balance between cell-mediated and humoral immunity. An important fact is that there are some pathogens or disease agents that might have a direct impact on these primary organs because they have them as their target organs. For example, chicken anemia virus and Marek's disease virus, they target the thymus, and infectious bursal disease virus and also Marek's disease virus might attack the bursa of Fabricius, and this will have severe consequences, as we can already expect. The consequence of all of this will be immunosuppression, which is an impairment of the normal immune response due to infectious or non-infectious causes. And this will result in a temporary or permanent dysfunction of the immune system that will lead to increased susceptibility to diseases. Immunosuppression is considered the main cause of economical losses in the poultry industry. And there is not like one typical clinical sign that we will see and we will know that our birds are suffering from immunosuppression. So what we will see is an increase in feed conversion, a higher mortality rate, the growth rate will be in general affected, there will be disuniformity in the flocks, we will have an increase in condemnation at the slaughterhouse due to septicemia and the presence of ursaculitis. There will be in general more bacterial diseases that will require antibiotic treatments. There will be more problems with coccidiosis, vaccination failures, and, for example, also prolonged post-vaccination reactions. Altogether, this will result in an increased cost for the poultry producer. Now let's talk a little bit about the infectious bursal disease viruses. These viruses can be classified according to molecular techniques into different groups. We have the classical type of viruses that were first recognized around a place called Gambro in the United States in the 60s, and they may result in some mortality and immunosuppression. Then later on, in the 80s, a more severe type of IBD was recognized in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East, and we find also nowadays these viruses present in many, many parts of the world. I would like to say that in general, IBD viruses are more severe on light breeds, on layered type birds. So as an example, if you use a classical type of isolate and you challenge layer type SPF birds, you might get a mortality rate of about 40%. But if you use a more virulent type of virus, the mortality rate will go up to 80 and probably 100% of the birds will be affected. So we see that at least for layer type birds, we really cannot play with IBD because an uncontrolled disease will lead to severe losses in the field. Then talking about a third type of virus, these are the variant types identified also in the 80s in the United States, and they do not really cause clinical disease as such, but will cause a fast atrophy of the bursa of Fabricius, and as a consequence, the birds will suffer from immunosuppression. Nowadays, more of the so-called new types or undocumented types of viruses are recognized, and these are, when you sequence the viruses, recombinant types of viruses that on one part resemble more the very virulent strains, whereas if you look or you sequence another part of them, they will resemble more the classical type of strains. The good news is that the vaccines that we have available, at least as far as I know, they are able to provide a good level of protection against these viruses. Here, I would like to share with you a chart provided by Dr. Daryl Jackwood. As you know, Dr. Jackwood is one of the persons that has done a lot of research about IBD. And well, first of all the classical strains, you could say they are present all over the world. The very virulent types represented here by the green dots, found also in many, many parts of the world. The variants mainly described in the American continent, sporadically in Europe, South Africa, and they have lately been reported also in China, South Korea and Japan, Australia, with their own variants, and the new recombinants or undocumented types represented here by the black dots found in different parts of the world as well. Some pictures about what we will see in the field here, a bird affected by a virulent type with a swollen bursa, with a gelatinous exudate around it. Maybe you could see some mortality in these birds. Whereas in the next slide, you will see in a more severe case, the hemorrhagic bursas, birds showing hemorrhages in the muscles, and a higher rate of mortality. Once again, this will be more severe in layer type birds than in meat birds. And as I mentioned, with the variant strains, what we will see will be smaller bursa and no mortality or any other kind of other lesions. Talking a little bit about Marek's disease. What we know about this virus is that since the beginning of the poultry industry, this virus has been steadily increasing its pathogenicity in the field. And it started with virulent strains, then the virulence increased to what they call very virulent strains, and now we're talking about VV plus or VV plus plus strains. And this is a big worry for the poultry industry because we don't know exactly where this is going to end, and we are still working in the field with the same type of vaccines. A few words about the pathogenesis of the Marek's disease virus. It is in the environment, basically in the dust that is present in the poultry farms. This virus will be inhaled by the birds, and it will go into the in the first days into the B lymphocytes, causing in these lymphocytes a cytolytic infection that will result in immunosuppression, which will be more of the early transitory type. Then in the next stage, about 2 weeks, the birds will start shedding the virus, mainly through the feather follicle tissue. On a later stage, the virus will go into so-called latent infection in the lymphoid organs and peripheral blood lymphocytes, causing a deregulation of the immune system and immunosuppression that will be more of the late and permanent type. And at a later stage, some birds will be able to develop tumors, which, as we know, are also a part of what we see in birds infected with this virus. So the consequences of infection with MDV will not only be the tumors and associated syndromes, but also immunosuppression. This is clearly seen in the next two charts. In the first one, we see the weight of bursas, of birds that have been challenged with Marek's disease viruses of different levels of virulence. And the more virulent the virus is, the more effect or the higher the reduction of the weight of the bursa of Fabricius at 8 and 14 days of age. And something similar we see in the next slide, in which the weight of the thymus is shown. So if the birds are challenged with more virulent strains, this will have a more severe impact on the weight of the thymuses. The thymuses will be smaller. So MDV will cause immunosuppression in infected birds, could be transient or permanent due to atrophy of the lymphoid organs. It will cause an impairment of the humoral and cell-mediated immunity, increase susceptibility to other pathogens, and there will be a synergistic effect if other immunosuppressive agents are present, like chicken anemia virus, reovirus, or Marek's disease virus together with infectious bursal disease virus. Vaccination against Marek's disease is a little bit like a race in which the one that gets there first will win. So we vaccinate our birds as early as possible because we want the birds to be in contact first with a vaccine virus and not with a field strain. We see that for this we use cell-associated frozen vaccines. There is no discussion about the age of vaccination. We use them in the hatchery. We can either use them in ovo, vaccinating the eggs at 18 days of embryonic life, or by a subcutaneous or intramuscular injection at the first day of age after hatch. And we must remember that we need cell-mediated immunity in order to get protection against Marek's disease. See the vaccines that we have available against Marek's disease, and we classify them into 3 serotypes, 1, 2, and 3. And according to the efficacy, depending on the strains in the field. So a serotype 3, an HVT, will be efficacious against milder strains of Marek's disease virus, whereas a serotype 1, the response strains, will be more efficacious if you have to protect your birds against more virulent strains. Also, we know that there will be a synergistic effect if we combine strains of different serotypes. For example, if you combine a serotype 1 and 3, which will be a response strains plus an HVT, you will get a much better protection against Marek's disease, and this could be used against the more virulent types of strains. Remember that I mentioned that there is a big worry by the poultry industry because of the always increasing virulence of strains in the field, and we don't know exactly where this is going to end. So lately, a new vaccine has been introduced in some markets, and in the future we will see it in more places in the world, and it is a chimera, a serotype vaccine, which is based on 3 different Marek's disease viruses, but we could say that the backbone or most of it is based on the response strain, and about almost 84% of it consists of the response strain, and the rest of it will consist of other strains that were isolated from the field. Few words on the use of HVT, and especially not really related to the protection against Marek's disease, but recent research have shown that it is beneficial to use an HVT vaccine because it will help in the maturation of the immune system. So already, just by the fact that we are using an HVT in our vaccination program, the immune system will perform better, will mature better. So it is a good thing to include an HVT vaccine in the vaccination program. A few words about the vaccination tools against infectious bursal disease virus. We have basically 3 types of vaccine: first, second, and third generation. The first generation consists of attenuated viruses. These are live attenuated viruses. And before I continue, I would like to say all of these concepts are still valid. All of the vaccines that we have available against IBD are still valid. They will all perform if we challenge birds and we let these vaccines induce protection. But the main concern about the use of the first generation type of vaccines is that we need to consider the level of maternal immunity. If the level is too high, our vaccine could be neutralized. And if not, if the virus is able to take and replicate in these birds, it will cause some lesions in the bursa of Fabricius. Then we have the immune complex vaccine or second generation type of vaccine. And this consists of a little bit of a stronger strain, which is tied up with antibodies. But here we also need to consider the level of maternal immunity. The maternal immunity needs to go down to a certain level for this complex to detach and the immunization to start in these birds. And as a third option, we have the vector type of vaccines. In the next slide, we see that they consist of the HVT as a vector, and a part of the genetic material of the IBD viruses has been introduced into the genetic material of the HVT. And with the replication of the HVT, it will express a protein of the IBD virus, which is called the VP2, viral protein 2, which is important for protection. So in the end, this type of vaccine will result in protection against Marek's disease, milder forms of Marek's disease, and against IBD. We see that we don't need to worry about levels of maternal immunity against IBD because we don't have an IBD virus involved in this vaccine as such. So it is used as one vaccination in the hatchery, either in ovo at 18 days of embryonic life or at date of age by injection after hatching. We see some of the benefits of using these kind of vaccines. We see in the lower part of the chart on the left, negative control birds, slides of the bursa of these birds showing the normal structure of this organ. In the middle, we see the bursa showing of birds that have been vaccinated with the recombinant vaccine, showing no changes at all in this histological slide. And in the upper part, we see very, very nice big bursae. And on the right side below, we see the bursa of birds that were vaccinated with an intermediate plus type of vaccine 17 days later, showing some of the lesions that this type of vaccines produce in the bursa of Fabricius, and in the upper picture reflected on the size of the bursa. We will find smaller bursas in these birds. So altogether, by using the recombinant HVT IBD vaccine, we will get protection against all types of IBDVs, classical, very virulent strain, and variants, and we will get enhanced response to other vaccinations. Now I would like to talk a little bit about the advantages that the use of a recombinant vaccine against IBD will have on the immune system of commercial layer pullets. And this study was carried out in Europe. And here they compared 3 groups of layers. One group was vaccinated with a recombinant HVT IBD vaccine. The next one with an IBD intermediate type of vaccine, and the third one with an IBD intermediate plus type of vaccine. We see some of the parameters measured, the first one being the bursa body weight ratio at 70 days of age. And this is calculated by a formula by which the higher the score, the better it is. That means that the birds have a bigger bursa. And as we see here on the chart, the group that was vaccinated with a recombinant HVT IBD vaccine shows the highest score for the bursa body weight ratio in comparison to the groups that use the intermediate or intermediate plus type of vaccine. We see the percentage of B lymphocytes from the total of lymphocytes in the peripheral blood 13 days post-vaccination. And also here we see that the birds that received the recombinant HVT IBD vaccine have the highest level of B lymphocytes in the blood in comparison to the birds that were vaccinated with the intermediate or intermediate type intermediate plus type of vaccine. We see the level of antibodies against Newcastle disease by using measured in an HI test. Normally, the Newcastle disease virus is used to measure possible immunosuppression due to the use of an IBD vaccine because Newcastle disease vaccines are very sensitive to immunosuppression. So if a bird is immunodepressed, it will not develop a good immunity against Newcastle disease. So here the birds were vaccinated with a multivalent inactivated vaccine containing Newcastle disease antigen. And we see at 70 days of age that the birds that were vaccinated with the recombinant HVT-IBD vaccine showed the highest levels of antibodies against Newcastle in comparison to the birds that were vaccinated with the intermediate or intermediate plus type of vaccines. Then let's look at some performance data of layer pullets. When we talk about performance data of pullets, there are two important parameters that we have to consider. First of all, is the average weight gain, and the second is the uniformity. So normally you will receive a standard curve from the genetic company selling these kind of birds, and they provide you with a guideline of the weight that these birds should stay within throughout their rearing period and the percentage of uniformity that you should expect, because we know that if you comply with these parameters, it will translate into a well-performing layer flock in the future. So in this comparison, we have a group that was vaccinated with the recombinant HVT-IBD vaccine together with a Rispen strain, and the control group was vaccinated with their standard program, which consisted of an HVT Rispens combination against Marek's disease and an intermediate type of plus of vaccine against IBD given 3 times. Remember that I said that we don't play with IBD in layers because they are more susceptible. So they were using this intermediate plus type of vaccine 3 times in those birds. And here are what the results. In the next slide, we see the average body weight until 40 days. We see a difference of 22.8 grams in difference for the group that was vaccinated with the recombinant HVT IBD vaccine in comparison to the group that used the intermediate plus vaccine. Then on the next slide, the average body weight until 10 weeks of age, we see that there is a steady growth, very close to the standard for the group that was vaccinated with the recombinant HVT IBD vaccine, and the group that was vaccinated with the intermediate plus vaccine around 7 weeks, they show a dip in the weights that they kind of compensate by 10 weeks, but during 3 weeks, those birds were below the standard expected for that particular breed. And uniformity in the next slide, until 10 weeks of age, we see that the uniformity was the best also for the group that was vaccinated with the HVT IBD vaccine in comparison to the group that was vaccinated with the intermediate plus type of vaccine. So to conclude, a good immune foundation is crucial in order to guarantee a healthy and productive layer flock. Among other options, the recombinant HVT-IBD vaccine combines a perfect balance between safety and efficacy with 1 dose in the hatchery. And the recombinant HVT-IBD vaccine is gentle on the immune system, and it results in protection against the different types of IBDV and milder forms of MDV. And if enhanced protection against MDV is needed, it can be obtained by combining it with the Rispen strain. And the Rispen strain in most countries at this moment is still the best choice for vaccination against virulent forms of Marek's disease virus. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malo. To be presented for this afternoon's layer session is Precision Nutrition for Layers in Tropical Countries.
Thank you. Welcome back. Our next speaker earned his International Relations degree and Master's in Science degree in Bogor Agriculture University, Bogor, Indonesia. He finished his Master's in Applied Science as well as his Doctorate of Philosophy, University of NSW, Sydney, Australia. Awarded by ARSSP as postdoctoral fellowship to USA. He also received awards from the Ministry of Agriculture as Principal Research Scientist. He is the technical consultant of U.S. Grains Council from 2004 to the present, and also the technical consultant of U.S. Soybean Export Council. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Budi Tangenyaya.
Hi everyone from the Philippines. A very good day for today. I'm Budi Tangenyaya. I'm a nutritionist by training. At the moment, I'm a technical consultant for USEC based in Indonesia. My involvement with the USEC will be coverage in Southeast Asia, but will be based in Indonesia. Okay, my presentation today will be talking about the layer nutrition requirement, especially in the tropical area. But for feeding layer, we have to consider about the feed consumption in the tropic because the hot weather. And then I'm going to cover also what the formulation have to be adjusted for feeding layer. Before I make a conclusion, we have to consider what the feeding system that can be applied for the layer. The genetic of the layers is improving every year because the genetic company keeps selecting the bird to be much better in egg production. However, there are several areas that affecting the poultry performance, especially in the tropic. The first one will be on the chick quality. We remember that the chick quality will influence the performance of the pullet. So it is critical to receive the better quality of the chick from the hatchery. However, in order to produce the good pullet, you have to also to consider about the environment. Several environment will affecting the performance of the bird, such as, for example, the common one will be temperature. In hot weather, like in the Philippines, the temperature will be very high, but the temperature also related with the humidity. We have to consider about the stocking density in producing the layer, but we have to consider also possible the air quality. This is a critical, especially in the ventilated house one. Of course, for the layer also we have to consider the photo period, the intensity of the light that influence the reproductive performance of layer. Last but not least, of course, the disease become critical, especially in the tropic. We are challenged every day by diseases for the chicken. So we have to maintain the antibody status very critical. However, we are not going to discuss about the environment control or affecting performance of the bird. For today's lecture, I'm going to focus on nutrition and the feeding. So if talking about nutrition or feeding, we have to consider about the healthy gut, because the feeding of the nutrient have to be better for the gut health. So this is the graph representing about the performance of layer because genetic improvement. Back in year 2000, probably the layer start to lay egg at 20 weeks of age. Nowadays, it's possible that the layer will start to produce egg by 17 weeks of age. If you look at the peak performance, before probably around 90%, it will be happy. But nowadays, many layer farm able to produce egg at 95% egg production. And the good thing regarding about the layer, modern layer nowadays, the persistency in the laying period is very good. So they are able to maintain 90% hen day production will be for a long time. There's a report of layer farm in the tropic. They're able to maintain more than 50 weeks of 90% hen day production. So this is the important with the genetic improvement of the layer. So early lay and persistence in the production is critical in order to maintain the profitability for the layer. What happened when the genetic change in the laying period for the layer? Of course, the requirement will be different. Although the egg formation will be similar, which is around 24 hours, however, because improvement in productivity, it is reported that the daily amino acid requirement has been changing, has been increased around 23% in the last 30 years. Of course, because the body weight of the layer is become smaller and also the performance is become earlier, the reduction in the feed intake has been noticed in the field. Back probably 30 years ago, the feed consumption is 135, but nowadays it's common to become 150 grams. So you have to increase the nutrient density in the feed. It was reported that the amino acid requirement may increase probably 46% in the feed in the last 30 years. So what the requirement of the layer? If we're talking about the requirement of the layer, we have to divide it by two. One is really for feeding pullet, and secondly is feeding during the laying period. For pullet, the target performance will be the body weight and uniformity. Not only body uniformity, but also body conformity, which means that, for example, the frame size become critical, and then the leg size become longer to produce the better, bigger quality of the egg. However, during laying period, we have to provide the precise nutrition for maximizing of the egg production. So that's the reason why our topic today will be precise nutrition, which means that we have to provide nutrient sufficient for the bird requirement. Why? Because if there is undernutrition, for example, if there's not enough nutrient provided to the bird, the production will not be maximized. The egg size will be affected. There's a typical, probably egg size becomes smaller, and the body weight may decrease. This is critical. If during laying period, the body weight of the bird decreasing, it will be a problem at the end of the laying period because the egg production will drop very quickly. So the egg production will drop at the peak, has been noticed in several cases in the layer farm. Why? Because the energy requirement for the bird to maintain the productivity is not met by the supply of the energy coming from the feed. If there's a deficit in energy level, at the end of the day, the egg production will drop very quickly at peak during the peaking period. The immunity also will be compromised if we don't provide sufficient nutrient for the layer. Egg quality can be affected, has been reported. For example, if deficient in kind of calcium, the eggshell quality will be suffer. However, not only other nutrition, the overnutrition also can be a problem because high energy in the feed, for example, may cause a fatty liver in the bird. It's possible that egg production will drop very quickly at later stage of production. The high protein also in the diet may provide kind of the bacterial nutrient for the bacteria in hindgut and creating more problem in the gut health, and also the possibility of high ammonia level because the protein will be deaminated in the body and then will be excreted, become uric acid and metabolized to become ammonia. So very often we can detect that high ammonia level in the laying house because too much protein in the diet. So the high calcium also may limit the feed intake. So the overnutrition, like high calcium, may limit the feed intake. But of course, the high amount of the phosphorus, many farmers has been providing too much phosphorus, I consider, in the diet. The high amount of the phosphorus not really improving the egg quality. In fact, too much phosphorus may reduce eggshell quality. This is my experience when feeding high amount of the phosphorus for the layer in the tropic. In addition, if there's too much nutrient, what happens? The cost will be higher. My estimate at the moment, with 1% increase in the protein, the diet cost may cost around $6. However, when you increase the high energy, for example, the extra 100 kilocalorie of the diet may cost around $10 nowadays because energy is become very expensive. So how do you formulate the diet for the layer? This is the step that I can recommend. One, you have to estimate how much the energy requirement daily. What I mean by daily, how much the energy kilocalorie that consumed by the bird every day, whether it is sufficient to maintain egg production and then maintain the body composition. And secondly, once the energy requirement has been found out, and then we can estimate how much the feed consumption really in the field. So how much really feed intake in the field in certain particular house. Based on the feed consumption, we can estimate how much the energy content in the diet for formulation. So we have to know the requirement daily first and calculate how much the feed intake, so I can estimate how much the energy content in the diet. Similarly, after the content of the feed consumption has been defined, we have to calculate how much amino acid. In this case, is digestible amino acid, and also other nutrients such as calcium, available phosphorus, and mineral based on feed consumption. So knowing feed consumption in the field is critical to formulate the diet properly. So the input, all the nutrient specification have to be inputted in the feed formulation software. So I recommend that everyone who want to make their own feed for feeding layer, we recommend to develop your own feed formulation software and calculate the diet properly. And then after that, you can send it in the feed production. So what the requirement of the laying? So the energy is the first one. In order to calculate the energy requirement will be affected by the body maintenance, because the size of the bird will be different between one house and the other house. So have to know, because the bigger bird will require more energy. The second one, we have to calculate how much the growth, because during laying period, especially in the beginning of lay, the body weight of the bird will increase approximately about between 300 to 100 grams. And then we have to calculate egg production. By meaning of egg production, we have to calculate with the weight and multiply by hand day, because we estimate requirement based on the egg mass rather than percent hand day production. The feeding system for laying will be different with the broiler, because feeding system of layer will be based on the product. For feeding broiler, we provide the feed as much as possible, let the bird consume so much nutrient in order to grow faster. But feeding layer is based on the production, body weight, and also the environment. So how do you calculate the energy requirement? This is the equation that reported by University of Arkansas back in 2011. How do you estimate the energy? This is the equation we developed. This is depending on the body weight, depending on the body weight change, and also depending on the egg mass. So similar report, a recent report by Brazilian table, which is back in 2017, they estimate how much the energy requirement for the bird. So the energy requirement will be affected by the body weight, and also the gain, which is changing in the body weight during laying period, and of course, how much the egg mass will be produced. But of course, because the environment temperature will influence the energy requirement, we have to correct with the temperature of the environment. So I developed a kind of the calculator here. This is an Excel calculator that we developed based on the equation that previously mentioned. So MA requirement, daily MA requirement will depend on the body weight, depending on the temperature, depending on the daily gain, depending on hand day production and egg weight. So we can change the blue cell here, whatever the situation in the field. Say when the body weight is changing to become 2 kilo, we can change easily in the blue cell, this one. And then we can calculate that the energy requirement daily by the layer will be used for maintenance, and will be used for the growth, will be used for production, and also temperature correction. So how much the daily requirement of the energy, we can estimate based on the equation like Craig Kuhn 2011 will be around 317 calories per day when the body weight is 1.9 and temperature 26. However, when we use it, the Brazilian equation is that the requirement will be around 302 kilocalories per day. So this is the equation that we can use to estimate how much the energy you have to calculate in the formulation. Of course, after finishing with the energy, we have to know how much the amino acid in the diet. Again, amino acid in the diet will be based on the intake. So we have to know how much the feed intake in the laying house. So this is the proposal that developed by Highline company, that how much the amino acid for feeding layer. This is depending on the feed intake and divided also different phase of feeding. During the picking, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, depending on egg production. So the calculation is depending on egg production. So we can change the yellow cell color here depending on the feed intake situation in the field. Say, for example, if during picking period, the feed intake is 110 gram, you can change the number to become 110, and automatically how much the digestible energy, digestible amino acid have to be put in the formulation. So this is another calculator to estimate how much the digestible nutrient for feeding layer daily. So example. So again, the following how much the amino acid will depend on the ideal protein ratio. So every phase of the layer will be different formula, different profile of amino acid following the ideal protein concept. There's a reason why we have to develop the feeding system based on the phase feeding, because the layer production is changing during the laying period, the egg size is changing, the body weight is changing. There's reason we cannot feed the same feed through all the egg production. We have to change the feed during the laying period, what we call it the phase feeding. And there's reason why, for example, this is the Highline. Highline reported that we have to develop kind of 5 phase feeding during the laying period. So the first feeding will be during the picking, because the consumption during the picking period will be very low. So we have to develop special feed for picking. And secondly, layer 2, which is depending on production from 2% to become 90%, and 88 to become 85 until the old layer. So this is kind of recommendation that we can develop, but the actual formulation, my recommendation will be used based on the calculation. So how much your feed intake in the laying period, and we can estimate how much the nutrient density in the feed. This is another example reported by Brazilian, a table regarding what the brown egg requirement. So again, depending on the body weight, depending on the egg mass is different. So depending on the body weight gain and egg mass, we can estimate how much the energy requirement, how much the energy density, and how much also the digestible amino acid you have to put it in the feed formula. Mineral, let's move toward the mineral. This is recommendation from the Isa Brown from France. They recommended 3 different feeding systems to calculate how much the total calcium. Again, the amount of the calcium is depending on the daily requirement. So for the first beginning of lay, for example, the requirement per day will be 3.9 to 4.1 gram of the calcium per day. And if the feed consumption is around 110 gram, so you can feed it the laying period during beginning of lay will be around 3.6% in the diet. So similarly with other calcium, with other mineral like sodium and chloride, also we can calculate how much supposed to be put it in the feed formulation. What I like to mention here, what kind of the calcium we have to provide it. It is recommended that the size of the particle of the calcium have to be adjusted, have to be before the laying period, the bird require the large particle of calcium. There's reason why the size of the coarse particle around 2 to 4 millimeter have to be provided. At least 50% of the calcium provided for the diet will be a bigger size of the limestone. Another interesting result is reported split feeding for the layer. This is the report, study report by Korean researcher, that because the requirement of calcium is different between morning and the afternoon, they develop different feed for the morning feed and afternoon feed. So the morning feed, we can reduce the calcium to become 0.5%, while in the afternoon, we can increase the calcium in the feed, become very high. So by the system, it has been reported that the eggshell gravity will be higher, and also percentage of shell will be higher. At the end, the quality of eggshell will be better off. So this is another option, but however, practicability have to be considered, because providing different feed in the morning and the afternoon will be difficult for the farmers. So what the requirement have to be translated in the formula, feed formula. Formula specification normally is expressed as a percentage or percentage in the formula. Therefore, we have to take into account about the ability of the bird consume daily, how much the feed consumption is, because we calculate in the formula have to be how much the total nutrient intake per day, which is expresses, for example, kilocalorie per day for the calorie, for the energy, and also for the amino acid can be milligram per day. So, but again, the feed formula can be good as far as we know the quality of feed ingredient, because the formula is composed by different feed ingredient. So we have to know what ingredient to be used and what the quality to be used in the formula. The formula have to meet the nutrient specification. The feed ingredient can be constrained during the formulation because considering possible toxicant detected in the feed ingredient, and we have to consider possible palatability of certain feed ingredient for the layer. So we have to run least cost feed formulation after defining what the nutrient requirement and also providing the ingredient. However, there's another obstacle that we detected in the field regarding what the feeding layer in the hot tropic and especially in the hot climate, that the feed consumption that we are expecting to be high, say for example at least 110 grams, is not met because the environment temperature is very high. For example, during the hot weather, the consumption may drop. In such case, will be very difficult to reformulate the diet. So what the best approach will develop kind of the feeding system, what we call it providing midnight lighting or midnight feeding. So during middle of the night, we provide the 1 hour lighting, for example, to allow the bird will consume the feed. So we have to provide the feed in the feed trap at mid of night, so the bird will consume more feed in order to increase nutrient intake daily. However, the recommendation is mainly for the layer who are not able to consume sufficient feed during the daytime. So, but at the end of the day, when we formulate the diet, when we estimate about the formulation also, at the end of the day, we have to calculate how much the profitability. The best approach is to look at the bird, feed the bird, measure how much the egg production, the body weight and feed intake, and you can try to optimize all the least cost, not only the feed, but the least cost egg production. So depending on the farm management, because the application of the feed that we formulate properly may be different with the farm management available in the field. So we have to observe what kind of the farm management, because many cases, for example, they're giving the feed and there's a lot of feed wastage in the farm, which is feed we calculated 115 grams. Probably the real intake may not be 115 grams, but probably less because some with feed wastage. Again, production of the feed have to be critical. What kind of the processing, what kind of the grinding system or mixing system, whether you're able to produce the feed in more consistent result based on the formula. So this is another one which is considered for feeding layer. Should we feed the crumble feed? Many farmers asking me, said, should we feed the pelleted feed or crumble feed for layer? For me, it's depending on the feed intake. If the feed intake become a problem and you provide midnight feeding also is not sufficient, there's possibility that you can feed the pelleted feed to increase the feed intake. However, when feed intake is sufficient, it's not necessary to provide the pelleted feed or crumble feed. On the picture on the right-hand corner here, this is the typical size of the limestone. We have to provide it in the feed. So in conclusion, before I end my presentation, the modern layer is changing every year. The changing not only in the body size, become smaller, the performance will be much better, feed intake will be lower. There's reason why the nutrient requirement every day will be changing because the genetic improvement. The environment will influence the productivity, especially the temperature. So we have to provide the nutrition which have to be precise according to the bird requirement. In order to formulate properly, you have to know what the daily feed intake, what the temperature in your house, and also the egg mass and also the body size. So the fast feeding is recommended at least probably 3 different ration if possible. Don't give it only one single ration through production cycle, but I prefer at least you have to provide 3 different ration, if possible 5. So when condition is optimized, it is possible to reach the better performance, especially with the number of the egg, hen-day production, and then also feed conversion ratio, which means that how much the feed to get 1 pieces of egg. You have to calculate properly because this is affecting the profitability of the laying. So feeding management have to the objective of the feeding management is try to obtain the lowest cost production rather than to maximize hen-day production. And of course, a good shell quality is critical because the breakage will reduce the income for the farmers. And we have to remember that we have to get less nutrient in the waste because the pollution become critical, especially for the environment. So we have to provide precise nutrient for feeding layer with less nutrient coming from the excreta. With that, I'm going to stop here. I'll be happy if there's any question. I will be happy to answer that one. With that, thank you so much for the attention. Hope to see you again. Salamat po.
The fourth paper to be presented for this afternoon's layer session is Persistency of Laying Hens Considering 500 Eggs in 100 Weeks.
Now for our fourth speaker. In this session, he specializes in layer nutrition and management. He is a graduate from Kanakkale University, Kanakkale, Turkey. He finished his postgraduate studies at Aegean University, Technical Department at Izmir, Turkey. He worked as poultry nutritionist in Normgida, Konya in year 2001 to 2002. Broiler supervisor in Charampoa Pokhan Food CP Turkey in 2002 up to 2005. Poultry coordinator in Inve Nutriad Turkey in 2005 up to 2012. Poultry portfolio manager in Nutreco Nutrition Turkey in 2012 up to 2017. Currently, the Global Poultry Technical Manager, ADM Wisdom Division from 2017 up to the present. He conducted several training programs, such as factors affecting to FCR in broilers, laying hens, nutrition and management, Aviagen hatchery seminars, Cub broiler breeder seminars, Hendrix genetics laying hens, Highline genetic improvement laying hens, 500 eggs in 100 weeks, SFRC and performance of broiler breeders. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Osgur Korkmaz.
Hello everyone, my name is Özgür Korkmaz. I'm a poultry technical specialist as a global in Wisdom Corporate. I'm attending from Turkey. Today, I would like to give a presentation about persistency for laying hens, of course, considering 500 eggs in 100 weeks. Today, our agenda, genetic improvement. How can we maximize the number of eggs until 100 weeks? And we will mention a pullet period, energy and amino acid needs during the production period, feed structure, feeding techniques, eggshell quality, gut health and liver health, and type 2 diabetes, its effects on laying persistency and solution. And we will conclude. As you know, egg production has been increasing for last 10 years in the world and will have increased more than 35% for the next 20 and 30 years. That's why genetic companies are working very well in terms of feed intake capacity, quality, livability, and production performance in different systems and laying performance. They are doing very well. They are very successful. That's why today they can say it is possible to get 500x in 100 weeks. One of the parameters is that pullet period. Pullet period has a strong correlation between persistency and this period. We have to provide correct body weight and body condition before they start to lay, and this will enable to pullets to achieve their genetic targets at the production period. Pullet period is one of the important criteria for the laying production. First target during the pullet period, body weight at 5 weeks. Body weight at 5 weeks has very good correlation with early maturity and production persistency, especially hen-housed eggs up to 60 weeks or 72 weeks, besides livability. And also uniformity at 16 weeks of age is very important. Good correlation, production persistency, hen-housed eggs up to 60 and 72 weeks, and also livability. If we have underweight pullets at the end of the 16 weeks of age, they will not stay on the peaking period between 26 and 26 or 38 weeks of age, because as they are small, as they are under the weight, feed intake is lower, especially insufficient energy during the pre-peak, because of they are small and they will not stay on the peaking period. That's why we need to get right body weight and targeted body weight at the end of the pullet period. And also pullet uniformity. If we cannot reach targeted pullet uniformity, egg numbers and persistency will be influenced. You can compare uniform pullet flock or uneven flock, as you can see in the slide. 9 to 16 weeks of age during the pullet period, we need to increase the feeding capacity in this period. If we can provide high desired weight during this period, this is an indicator of feed intake capacity. High feed intake capacity can help us to reach mature body weight, as they have a bigger feed intake capacity during the peaking period. They will stay on the persistency longer. After the pullet period, production period is starting. Energy needs should be managed very well, because you see energy repartition in terms of maintenance and production and growth. We need to be careful, especially between 17 weeks to 25 weeks of age, while they are reaching peaking period. Growth is still continue. Maintenance is big part of the energy needs. That's why during the peaking period, growth and production and maintenance, their energy repartition should be considered, should be managed very well. It will affect to persistency. Also, amino acid nutrition is another important for the nutrition part. We are using ideal amino acid ratio. We need to consider their feed intake per day. If we can manage very well their daily ideal amino acid ratio regarding to feed intake level, we can have higher laying persistency. We can get maximize egg numbers from each hen. Feed structure is another important point. We should not underestimated because hens don't like eating fine particles. Our target is maximum 10% if they are less than 0.5 millimeter. Just to show you in this trial, if fine particles, which is less than 0.5 millimeter, more than 10%, this is an example, it is 31% fine particle, which is too much. And we can see that laying percentage will decrease minus 3.2%, and egg weight decreases, egg mass decreases, consumption is decreases, especially body weight at later stage will decrease as well. We need to provide right particle size if we want to maximize egg numbers from each female during the production period. Feed structure, we are giving mush feed. We need to make sure birds must eat all the required nutrients daily basis. That's why we apply anti-feeder techniques lunchtime during 2 hours. We need to let them finish all the fine particles as much as we can. Why we do that? We know that they have a selective eating behavior to avoid risk from nutrient deficiencies. Benefits of feeding techniques: we will have more uniform flock, better laying percentage, and better eggshell quality. Eggshell quality is another important point to get maximum egg numbers, especially salable eggs. Eggshell quality should be managed very well as they are getting older, especially after the 40 weeks of age. Breaking strength is decreasing, and also shell thickness, especially after the 40 weeks, is decreasing, and broken eggs percentage is increased after the 40 weeks of age. We need to control, we need to minimize broken eggs percentage. We have a different ways, especially we can control egg size with our nutritional and some management solutions to control eggshell quality. Gut health should be considered very well. A nutritionist should control gut microbiota. There are different ways to control the microbiota, but we are using ion exchange technology to increase beneficial population of beneficial bacteria and decreasing protobacterial level and decreasing actinobacterial level. And also a nutritionist should provide good gut integrity, especially tight junction, integrity of tight junction are common topic between the poultry nutritionists. If we can control integrity of tight junction in the intestinal structure, we can control digestion, we can maximize digestion. Consequently, we can have higher performance during the production period. And feed safety is important, and drinking water quality should be controlled. And also, if we can stimulate gizzard activity, especially as I told you, between 9 to 16 weeks of age, if we can increase gizzard activity with our nutritional solution, we can maximize number of eggs during the production period. Liver is a unique organ for us because of liver has a lot of responsibility. For example, fat and carbohydrate and protein metabolism and mineral metabolism and also vitamin metabolism. Especially liver has an important mission to convert vitamin D3 to 25-hydroxy D3. And also liver is working very well during the detoxification period. If we can control liver health during the production period, especially at the end of the period, we can maximize number of eggs from each hen. Lipoprotein are performed by the liver, and also we need to check situation of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, normally a hen, we are giving around 300 kilocalorie to ingest during the daytime, and also after 300 kilocalorie is ingested, insulin control or regulate blood carbohydrates, storage and mobilization nutrients by the tissue. Part of the fatty acids are stored in the body reserves for the adipose tissue, and these fatty acids are mobilized to fuel lipoprotein synthesis in the liver. And by the way, lipoproteins let fat to move entire the body, especially they are made by protein and lipid molecule. And also estrogen hormones has a lot of tasks. For example, they are responsible during the ovulation process, and also estrogen is responsible to transfer lipoprotein from the liver to the yolk via blood circulation. This lipoprotein arrive to the yolk, and the yolk can be bigger because of lipoprotein is part of the yolk. All this process are in the liver, and especially carbohydrates from the diet have to become the fatty acid, included lipoprotein. It is very difficult if formulation has too much carbohydrates, and liver has to work to convert carbohydrates to become fatty acid. Liver is tired during this process, especially for the longer period of the production. Especially when they get older, laying performance is decreasing because of a lot of reasons, especially hormonal dysfunction and fatigues, especially liver metabolism. When they get older, they become fatigues, and also functional hormonal dysfunction, and insulin resistance is increasing, especially after 40 weeks of age. There are a lot of reasons, and in this case, cell resistant to insulin and diabetes issue can be seen. This is the reason why there are two estrogen receptors. We call them estrogen alpha and estrogen beta. While estrogen beta receptors are stable when they get estrogen, but estrogen alpha, which create anti-diabetes, its function is changing because of fatigues, and estrogen alpha receptors becomes resistant to insulin, and it creates diabetes. Same for the human. For example, we are eating too much glucose from our foods, and in this case, too much glucose, and besides decreasing of insulin production by the pancreas, organs cannot use insulin, they become resistant, and less carbohydrate is used by the body. A lot of carbohydrate and glucose remain in the blood circulation. This is a typical type 2 diabetes. It is same for laying hens, because of we are giving ad libitum feeds to them during the per day, and liver is working too much, a lot of pressure on the liver. Besides, unbalanced feed especially metabolic energy, too much metabolic energy, type of metabolic energy. It can come from the corn or the fat. And also they are in the cages, they cannot move. It creates diabetes. They become resistant to insulin levels. So estrogen alpha receptors create insulin sensitivity, which creates anti-diabetes, and estrogen beta create insulin resistance. It creates pro-diabetes, and normally there should be balance, but when they are getting older, insulin resistance increasing because of estrogen alpha receptors are not sensitivity. Estrogen sensitivity to estrogen are not working properly, and estrogen beta action gets the upper hand on the estrogen alpha and its related anti-diabetic effects. So we work during the more than 6 years to make solution to type 2 diabetes. We created an active vegetal material. This active vegetal material is coming from the ferula SPP, very stable molecule, and it aims to restore insulin cells sensitivity, especially to account for of this molecule is acting very well insulin sensitivity. The target is we need to create insulin sensitivity with restoring estrogen alpha receptor with this active vegetal material. And then later on, insulin resistance is not increasing, it stays stable, and consequently, laying performance will not decrease. Laying performance will stay same, but we expect considering genetic targets, and we will have higher persistency. And also another benefit of this active vegetal material, it reduces fatty liver syndrome. So estrogen alpha activation and estrogen beta activation are working synchronized to control glucose level in the animal, and insulin sensitivity is controlled by this active vegetal material. Especially old layers after 50 weeks of age, we can see more fatty liver, and we can have fatty layers, higher fat, and consequently higher body weight. Feed conversion ratio is increased, laying percentage decrease or erratic, egg mass produce reducing and variable. And if we create sensitivity to insulin with this active vegetal material, we will improve liver health, we will reduce fat accumulation, we will improve feed conversion ratio, we will maintain persistency, we will stabilize egg mass. So we have a lot of study, independent research, and different feed condition in the world, just to check situation in the yolk at 80 weeks of age, control group, and active vegetal material. You will have more homogeneity. It means less day without egg. The control group and the number of developed yolk is more or less the same, but the diameter of the yolk is better with active vegetal material. We tested in the Philippines in 2019 between 53 to 73 weeks of age. They took active vegetal material during the 20 weeks, and you see, and yolk situation in the control group and with the active vegetal material. We have more yolk to ready to lay during the per day. It means we will have less day without egg. We tested at 80 weeks of age in the slaughter with the post-mortem to see liver and ovary tract evaluations. You see, we see more fatty liver in the control group, and we see less fatty liver and normal fatty liver during the in this trial with the active vegetal material group. Visual score percentage fatty liver, we can see less fatty liver as a visual scoring with active usage of active vegetal material. This active material boosts liver function, optimize fat metabolism, which is important. Regularly lipoproteins from the liver to the ovarium via blood, and it optimizes fat metabolism, optimizes lipoprotein transfer, and decrease fatty liver prevention. Active vegetal material optimize egg formation, better lipoprotein deposition in the yolk, more homogeneous ovarium, more yolks ready to ovulate. So after we tested many trials, we realized that we have more eggs with the active vegetal material from each hen, better lay persistency, feed conversion ratio is optimized, and also we tested in the breeders, broiler breeders, we see more marketable daily oat chick in pullets and broiler breeder chicks. So another trial is done between 51 to 78 weeks of age in 2014, and you see with the active vegetal material, it blue lines and control group black lines and standard genetic lines. Laying percentage is higher than the control group and the genetic lines. We could get plus 3.4% more laying with the active vegetal material. It means 6.4x more from each hen, and also feed consumption was 113 gram in control group and 111 gram with active material. We could reduce 2 gram feed by per hen. So we synthesized 5 trials after 50 weeks of age. They were done in R&D and commercial conditions in cages and aviary system, and France and Netherlands and Mexico, and also we did in Philippines. And average age at start 52 weeks, average trial duration 20 weeks, where we applied 1 kg of ton with vegetal active material, and we get plus 4.1x more from each hen and 2.3 gram less feed consumption, and also FCI is improved by 0.12 gram. So we can say the return investment is 4. So as a conclusion, to get maximum number of eggs from your flock, there is a positive correlation between body weight at 5 weeks and hen house eggs at 60 to 72 weeks. We need to control eggshell quality. We need to have liver healthy level during the production period. We need to minimize type 2 diabetes with this solution. Feeding techniques are important, and gut health linked with the performance. And also to summarize, holistic approach is needed for the persistency. We need to check each parameter. We need to provide each parameter as much as we can to get a maximized number of eggs. Thank you for the attention, and salamat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Korkmaz. The fifth paper to be presented for this afternoon's broiler session is the effects of zearalenone in poultry breeders and layers and strategies to counteract it.
Thank you, Mr. Korkmaz. I myself is excited to hit 500 eggs in 100 weeks. But if you will check the breeder's manual, at 100 weeks, they will only give you 485 eggs at 6% depletion up to 100 weeks. So probably to hit 500 eggs, you have to improve more on your 6% depletion and higher hen day production to hit 500 eggs. Let's try to do it. Okay, our next speaker has earned his degree, MSc Molecular Biology and Biotechnology in University of Groningen in the Netherlands. He conducted several training programs such as IHSIG in Bangkok, WPSA in Bangladesh, World Veterinary Poultry in Thailand, World Mycotoxin Forum in Bangkok, and Livestock Series webinar in mycotoxins in animal production. He worked as the Global Product Manager in Biomin Holding in 2015 up to 2019, and as Regional Product Manager in Biomin Singapore from 2019 up to the present. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Michele Muccio.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to be a speaker at the Philippine College of Poultry Practitioners. As you can see from the title of my presentation, today we're going to talk about mycotoxins, and specifically about zearalenone in breeders and layers. But before we talk about zearalenone, I would like to give you a little bit of a general overview to understand more about the concept of mycotoxins and the role that they play in animal health and on gut health. For today's presentation, I divided my talks into three parts. At the beginning, I will give you a brief introduction to the mycotoxin problem. Afterwards, I will dig into the zearalenone issue, and I will show you what is known from literature and also what is our experience on the field with these mycotoxins. And in the last part of my talk, I will discuss the strategies to counteract mycotoxins and zearalenone effectively. So without further ado, let's start with the first part. Well, when we have mycotoxins in the gut, there are two things that can happen. So either that can be absorbed by the intestinal cells and they can be then distributed and metabolized into the body where they produce their toxic effects, and some of these mycotoxins can be rapidly absorbed. As you can see here, good examples are aflatoxin and ochratoxin. But there are also some mycotoxins that show very little absorption, and those are deoxynivalenol, fumonisins, and so on, and even zearalenone. So what happens when we have those mycotoxins in the gut? Well, the mycotoxins that show a lower absorption, they will stay continuously in touch with the enterocytes. And because most mycotoxins are protein synthesis inhibitor, having those in contact with rapidly dividing cells, such as enterocytes, can be very detrimental and can give rise to all the issues that we see in the gut health, so the villi fusion, the villi atrophy, and the leaky gut. It is crucial to preserve the gut integrity because 70% of the immunity is in the gut. So if we are losing the gut, we are losing the first barrier of defense that we have from external stressors. But what does that actually mean? So I mentioned before, most mycotoxins are protein synthesis inhibitors. So you can see from those pictures over here, they directly influence nutrient absorption and epithelial cell proliferation, and they cause those issues that you can see here that are villi fusion and villi atrophy. So this gut that you see in those pictures over here, it's a gut that is not able to absorb nutrients anymore. And so the feed that we are introducing in the animal is wasted and the growth is compromised. Together with that, mycotoxins, they can directly act on some of the molecular transporters that we have on the gut cells, and they can completely impair their function. So the gut becomes also less effective in capturing the nutrients. Another crucial problem of having mycotoxins in the gut is the decreasing in the intestinal junction protein expression, which cause the leaky gut. And the tight junctions, as I mentioned before, they are a network of proteins and they're constantly dividing, and they act as the cement that keeps the gut cell together. So because mycotoxins are protein synthesis inhibitors, they can directly attack this network of protein and they can reduce their expressions, as you can see here on the right-hand side as an example with deoxynivalenol. So leaky gut, it means that we are opening the gate to all kinds of pathogens and stressors, and those can invade the body. Something that we need to keep in mind about mycotoxin is the synergism. The synergism is when the severity of one mycotoxin can be increased by the presence of others. And the synergism goes hand in hand with co-contamination. And co-contamination is, of course, the condition when more mycotoxins are present on the same feed commodity. And this is actually the rule and not the exception. So this happens because some foods and feed are often contaminated by cocktails of mycotoxins that are produced either by the same fungi or by different fungi. The toxicity of these cocktails of mycotoxins is very difficult to estimate. And if we have a look at the regulation throughout the world, and we have a look at the numbers that we see in the guidelines, those, they do not take into account the synergism, but they are based on single mycotoxin contamination. So they do not take into account this phenomena, and therefore they are not an accurate representation of reality. But thank God, things are changing within the scientific communities and within the regulatory authorities. You can see here on the left-hand side, much of the synergistic interaction that have been studied, that have been investigated in the literature. And you can clearly see how some of the most common mycotoxins that are found in feed can actually have synergistic interactions with each other, and they can make the problems that I showed you earlier, so the gut health, the resistance to pathogens, the immunity and everything, they can make them a lot worse. This slide here summarizes what I explained so far. If you look on the left side of this picture, we see a healthy gut. We see the villi, they're all nice and structured. We see a healthy tight junction, which are intact, and this gut is actually a semi-permeable layer, so it is what the gut should be. But when mycotoxins arrive, and this example is with deoxynivalenol, you can see how the villi are reducing in size, and you can see how the tight junctions are being removed, so they're being destroyed. And I mentioned before that the gut is the main gate against external stressors that we have, and is the 70% of the immunity. So if we are opening the tight junctions, we are opening the door to everything. And pathogens, other mycotoxins, viruses, other toxic entities, they can enter the body. Not only everything can enter, but having a leaky gut means that everything can come out. And this is a good example with the plasma amino acid leakage. So those amino acids, they leak from the body into the gut, and they become a substrate for pathogens to grow on. And when the bad pathogens, when the bad bacteria overgrow the good bacteria, we assist to what is called dysbiosis. And this slide over here, this comes from a publication from Gunther and Tonissen in 2014, shows the example with necrotic enteritis in poultry. So as a take-home message, it's very important to focus on mycotoxins as a whole, rather than looking into single mycotoxins, and to understand the concept of synergism and of co-contamination. Although this presentation will be focusing on zearalenone. But at least I could show you and I could put it to you into context that more mycotoxins are working together to disrupt animal health. Let's have a look at zearalenone in the literature and on the field. And let me share a little bit of the experience that we have within Biome. Let's start with a few notes about zearalenone. So zearalenone is a field mycotoxin and is produced by Fusarium species. It's the third most prevalent mycotoxin in Asia. It's a highly estrogenic compound, and because of that it's called a mycoestrogen, and it has a similar structure to estradiol, a very potent estrogen. Because of the similar structure, it competes for the same receptors as estradiol in the cells. So when the cell capped zearalenone, they think they are under estrogen. Zearalenone can cause fertility problems in both males and females. There is also detrimental effects on egg production and egg quality, and these are even more drastic when it is co-occurring with other mycotoxins. Zearalenone has a low acute toxicity, however, it also has immunomodulatory properties and might play a role in disrupting gut health, as I will show in the next slide. So there is not only the estrogenic components, but there is also other issues like the protein synthesis inhibition that can be aggravated when it's together in the feed with other mycotoxins. I want to show you this study from 2011 where the authors studied the effects of zearalenone and deoxynivalenol on immunity in broilers. And they had a look at two distinct immune cell populations, in the blood and in the duodenum. And birds were exposed to lower contamination levels, so lower levels of zearalenone and deoxynivalenol, and also higher levels. You can see from the table over here that although the general immune cell population was not significantly affected, you can see that the phagocytic activity was actually greatly impacted already with lower mycotoxin levels. So this means that the birds had a reduced immune response. If we move into the immune cell population in the duodenum, especially the lymphocytes, you can see that the different subtypes of lymphocytes, they were greatly affected by the presence of the two mycotoxins. And you can see also how the IgA, the immune globulin A, were actually drastically reduced already in the group that received lower amount of mycotoxins. And IgA is associated with mucous membranes. So the mucus is a very crucial component of the immunity. Speaking of which, I want to go back again into the gut and connect to a different publication. This study was from 2008, and the findings actually were quite similar because in this study, birds were exposed to mixtures of deoxynivalenol, T2, and zearalenone at very low amount, around 50 ppb, which is something very common that can be found in the feed. And you can see on the left-hand side the healthy goblet cells, and you can see that the combinations of those mycotoxins actually reduced the proliferation of those goblet cells, and goblet cells are associated with mucus production. So this means less protection against bacteria and against their compounds. And you can see here on the right-hand side the gut exposed to mycotoxins with reduced goblet cells compared to the left side. So two studies at different time points, but both having the same findings and both involving zearalenone. So keep in mind, not only there is an estrogenic component, which is important and that I will talk about in the next slides, but there is also the synergistic effect with other mycotoxins that can affect gut health. And that's why, yes, it is important to control zearalenone, but it's important to take mycotoxins as a whole, an holistic approach against those compounds. Another interesting study that was published in 2016 was actually investigating the effects of aflatoxin and zearalenone on egg production. And you can see here in these graphs, you have different groups, a control group, a group that only received aflatoxin, a group that only received zearalenone, and a group that received a combination of aflatoxin and zearalenone. And again, this study is really stressing on the importance of the synergism within those two mycotoxins. You can see easily that the groups that received both mycotoxins together, aflatoxin and zearalenone, had a much worse egg production compared to the mycotoxins alone, and also a much worse feed intake. Specifically, we're talking about a 50% reduction in egg production compared to control, and a 20% reduction in feed intake compared to control. So again, performance greatly affected by those two mycotoxins. If we have a look at the egg weight and the eggshell strength, we can also easily see that those were affected by the simultaneous presence of those two mycotoxins, which we can see here in the red bars, compared to individual mycotoxins. Another important thing is that zearalenone is a predisposing factor for the polycystic ovary syndrome. Polycystic ovary syndrome occurs when we have an excess in the production of hormones, specifically androgens and estrogens. So as I mentioned before, zearalenone is an estrogenic substance. So when there are high amounts of zearalenone in the feed, we can observe this condition. Let me show you how this one looks on the field actually. The one that you see, what you see in this slide, is a mycotoxin analysis report from one of our customers, one of the Biomin customers. And you can see that we have analyzed different mycotoxins, and here we have poultry layer feed. And you can see that this poultry layer feed had high amount of mycotoxins, so they are circled in red color, so red color indicates high, and low amount indicated in green of trichoticin mycotoxins, so like deoxynivalenol T2 and so on. So what are the implications of those levels of mycotoxins that I show you in the previous slides? Well, these customers had a 79% drop in the egg production and had those high levels of mycotoxins. When we performed a necropsis, we found polycystic ovary syndrome, and we also found gizzard erosion. Gizzard erosion coming most likely from the trichoticin mycotoxins, like the deoxynivalenol and the T2. Other symptoms that were observed in the customer were aneuplosia of the oviduct with the prolapse that you can see in the two pictures over here. And together with an egg drop, the customer also complained about the egg quality. So you can see here the eggshell thickness is compromised, so those eggs are cracking very easily. And also the albumin resulted quite liquid. So these are all characteristic, these are all problems that can come up with zearalenone. Let me show you another report still coming from a different customers. In this case, we can see a higher contamination. This customer is using DDGS, and we can see here is our color code. You can see one sample containing a medium in orange zinc contamination, one sample containing a high contamination in red, and also like very high amount of trichoticins and high amount of fumonisins. So this customer reported a drop in egg production of approximately 30%, as well as outbreaks of necrotic enteritis. And remember what I showed before about the role of mycotoxins, especially trichoticins, on necrotic enteritis. So we used the mycotoxin analysis as a differential diagnosis tool to try to see what was happening in the field and see what we could do to help the customer. So when we performed the necrosis, we found polycystic ovary due to the high amount of zearalenone and femoral head necrosis. And this is most likely due to the trichoticins that by opening the gut, they promote the pathogen invasion of the body and pathogen translocation to different districts, including the bone. So mycotoxins can also be a predisposing factor for lameness. And when they are together, the toxic effect is greater. Here I want to show you some field observation that came from Latin America. So this was a customer that sent us a sample of feed for analysis. And again, this gave us the opportunity to use the feed sample as a differential diagnosis. 500 ppb of Zen and 975 ppb of deoxynivalenol. And again, those are concentrations that are really common because all that I'm showing now comes from the field. So this is really what happens in feed in real time. We are not talking about peer reviewed. You can see that already with these levels in mycotoxins, the customer had a terrible egg quality, and also the eggshell was completely compromised by the simultaneous presence of those mycotoxins. This is also the same farm where we saw that these concentrations of zearalenone, they actually led to a decrease in the testicle size in males. And also here from the literature, you can see the testicles. You can see how a testicle that has been exposed to zearalenone is actually greatly reduced compared to a control testicle. This means, of course, that we are losing the fertility capacity of the males as well. And that's why at the beginning I showed you and I mentioned that zearalenone is not only affecting the females, but there's also a lot of effects in the male. How do we counteract zearalenone effectively? Well, there are a few things that we can do. So if we have a look at what happened in the markets, when it comes to mycotoxins, the most common practice is the addition of binders to the feed. However, the problem that we face is that most of the binders are low quality products with very poor quality control, lots of claims, and no scientifically validated mode of action. And unfortunately, this is the current situation. So adding those products in the feed will just yield a poor and unspecific absorption that will only deplete the feed, because those binders, they will mainly target the vitamins and the trace metals that are in the feed, and they will not pick up some of most of the mycotoxins. Another limitation of binders is that although some of them might be efficacious against aflatoxins, we know that trichothecins, fumonisins, and zearalenone cannot be absorbed. So customers are basically wasting money by adding those products in the diet, hoping to pick up those mycotoxins. When it comes to those classes of mycotoxins, the only strategy that effectively works is biotransformation. However, biotransformation is very complex to achieve, and in order to make sure that we are purchasing or that we are recommending a good product, it's necessary that this product has a third-party evaluation. I represent Biomin Animal Nutrition, and we are the only company with 7 European authorization into mycotoxin deactivation and biotransformation. So we are the only company that at the moment is producing enzymes for the deactivation of mycotoxins that are authorized in the EU. And having something authorized in the EU, it means that it's been evaluated by a third party, in this case, a big player, the European Union, for all the safety and efficacy. And this is something that so far is only available by us. So if we have a look at the mode of action of an effective mycotoxin deactivator, this mycotoxin deactivator should have 3 strategies. Biotransformation, where we use enzymes to deactivate the non-adsorbable mycotoxins like trichothecins, zearalenone, fumonisins, and so on. We should still have a binder component to take up the aflatoxin, and then a bioprotection. A bioprotection will offer a little bit of an extra aid against the toxic effect of mycotoxin. So ideally, it will be something that will protect the gut, protect the liver, and boost the immune system while the other components are deactivating the mycotoxins. The one that you see in the slides, again, the only product that has 7 EU authorization in mycotoxin deactivation and mycotoxin adsorption, because we are the only company that has an EU registered bentonite for the counteraction of aflatoxin, ergotalkaloids, and endotoxins, or LPS, lipopolysaccharide. Going into deep diving into the ingredients and starting from our biotransformation approach, if we have a look at strategies to deactivate trichotillins, we have an ingredient in the product formulation called BBSH 797, and it's a former EU bacterium, so it's a live organism, so it's a probiotic. And this probiotic is producing an enzyme called D-epoxidase, which is actually opening up the epoxid ring that you can see, this little triangle over here, in trichotillins. And this residue is what gives the toxicity to the chemical. Because BBSH is authorized in the European Union for poultry and swine, we had to prove that this product here is non-toxic, of course. So we can guarantee that the biotransformation, which is brought by this organism, will yield a non-toxic metabolite. And this is valid against all trichotillins. So mycotoxins are the same family of deoxynivalenol and T2. But our European registration actually tells us that this product is authorized against all trichotillin mycotoxins. So we are talking about more than 170, so 170. Another enzyme that is included in the Mycofix product line is the Zenzyme. So Zenzyme is the first and only purified enzymes that irreversibly degrades zearalenone in the gastrointestinal tract of the animal. This product is pending European registration for all animal species. So all the requirements for safety, efficacy, and identity have to be demonstrated. And you can see that having a purified enzymes, these enzymes is breaking up the molecule of zearalenone and is yielding the detoxified form. This detoxified form is, of course, non-estrogenic and non-toxic. And because we're pending the European registration, we had to do all the studies to demonstrate that. Another purified enzymes that we have, enzyme that we have in the product formulation is Fumzyme. Fumzyme is specifically designed to tackle fumonisins, some of the mycotoxins that come together with corn and can be particularly harmful for poultry in the gut health, especially when co-occurring with trichotillins and aflatoxins. The way Fumzyme work is basically cutting away the wings of the fumonisin molecule, yielding the detoxified form. This product here is not longer able to bind on the binding site in the cells, and therefore is non-functional anymore. And because Fumzyme is authorized in the European Union against for poultry and swine, of course, as for the other components, we had to demonstrate that this metabolite here is non-toxic and not active anymore. I reached the end of this presentation and I hope you enjoyed the talk. As a take-home message, I want to reflect on 4 points. I mentioned how zearalenone can directly affect fertility, immunity, egg production, and quality, and causing pathological alterations, like the effect on the gut health, but the PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. There is strong evidence of synergism between zearalenone and other mycotoxins like aflatoxin and trichotillins. Keep in mind the literature that I showed you before. So it is very important, and I mentioned this already several times during the presentation, to pay attention to the whole picture, not to single mycotoxin concentrations. Very importantly is that mycotoxin analytical reports can be used as a differential diagnosis, and I showed you a couple of cases earlier. So when we use them as a differential diagnosis, it can help us to identify problems, and it can help us to identify subclinical mycotoxicosis. Although not all the cases that I showed you before were subclinical, they all had higher amounts. Also remember that not all mycotoxins deactivators are the same, and that not all mycotoxins can be adsorbed. Adsorption is a very good strategy against aflatoxin if we have a scientifically validated bentonite, but it's not the solution to tackle other mycotoxins. And when we are choosing to purchase a mycotoxin deactivator, it is crucial that a third-party evaluation has been carried on the product to ensure quality, safety, and efficacy. And so far, we can only guarantee you at Biomin, thanks to our 7 European registrations. Thank you very much for listening to this talk, and I hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to see you in another event again. If you have any question, please feel free to send me an email at the address that you see below. I wish you a great success with the other courses, and thanks again for your time and attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mucho. We will now proceed with the open forum. We call on screen our 5 speakers: Dr. Joe Vicente Mapa, Dr. Aristoteles Malo, Dr. Buji Tangenyaya, Mr. Osgur Korkmaz, and Dr. Michelle Mucho. May we also call our moderator for this afternoon session, Dr. Ruben M. Frios.
Thank you. That is the end of all the 5 presentations from our very distinguished speakers. Thank you very much. But before that, I would like to make some corrections. Dr. Jovic Mapa is a doctor of veterinary medicine from UP Los Baños. Can we proceed now with our question and answer? My first question is for Dr. Jovic Mapa. The question is, can nutraceuticals like antioxidants and immune modulators or prebiotic and probiotics and gut health and liver health from plants and herb extracts or phytochemicals can replace or be comparable alternative to antibiotics in the control and prevention of stress and diseases? Dr. Jovic?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the question, Doc Ben. The current alternatives for antibiotic growth promotants that we have or are available at the moment can and may be comparable to AGPs, but they have to be in combination. No single probiotic, no single prebiotic can really replace or approximate the performance being given by antibiotic growth promotants. So they have to be in combination. So as per my presentation, each farm has different set of stressors and different sets of disease challenges. So it's imperative for the farm to look at these combinations and try what will work for their particular farms in relation to what diseases is more prevalent in the farm and what stressors, particularly environment and management stressors that are inherent in the farm, can be addressed by these particular combinations of alternatives to antibiotic growth promotant.
Thank you, Doc. As I understand in your presentation, the approach to antibiotic-free operation or eggs does not only depend on certain item, but it's a wholesome approach to
Yes.
the operation. No? So not just a probiotic or a single entity, but a combination of management, nutrition, biosecurity, and everything. Am I right, Doc?
Yes, Doc. Because our main objective primarily is to maintain gut health. Because if gut health deteriorates, then everything follows.
Thank you, Dr. Jovic. The next question is for Dr. Aris Malo. Dr. Malo, good afternoon. Here in the Philippines, can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Okay.
Can you hear me well?
Thank you. The first question is, what is the reason why layers are more susceptible to IBD?
I think that has to do with genetics. That's the only reason I would say. It's the genetics of the birds. They are indeed susceptible. They are more susceptible to IBD than the the meat type of birds.
So when they buy a DOP or day-old pullets, they should choose the right breed with a better immunity against IBD. Is that right?
The good thing about layers is that since they grow slower than broilers, their susceptibility in relation to the level of maternal immunity will be less at the beginning because the levels of the maternal immunity will be kept higher for a longer time than broilers. So actually, that is a plus point when we want to vaccinate layers. Yeah, that gives us a little bit more of time, but we have to be more careful because we know that they are more susceptible. So if you miss on your vaccinations, then the chance to get, let's say, a worst case of IBD will be more in layers than in broilers.
Okay. Your next question is, in the Philippines, many poultry farmers are asking why, despite viral vaccinations done in layer farms, still sporadic Newcastle disease outbreak has been reported. And as a vet practitioner and consultant, do you believe that giving immune modulator supplements from plant extracts or herbs with tested immune modulatory activity and enhancements 5 days before and after vaccination can resolve these issues of viral infections in spite of a very sound and good vaccination program? Very long.
Yes, I understand. Well, first of all, I think it's worth looking at the vaccination program because good protection against Newcastle disease depends on the type of challenge that you have in the field. And also the method of vaccine administration is very important. So altogether, it's important to take a look at the program. So you could think that you are doing the best program, but there are like, how to say, more modern ways of setting up a good vaccination program against Newcastle. I would like to add that Newcastle disease's vaccines are very susceptible to immunosuppression. Actually, they are used as an indicator of immunosuppression. If you want to see if IBD vaccine is causing any kind of immunosuppression, you would vaccinate the birds concomitantly with IBD and Newcastle, and then you challenge for Newcastle. If the IBD vaccine is immunosuppressive, then you would have a not so good protection against Newcastle. So immunosuppression can definitely play a role. Actually, I enjoy very much. First of all, I joined the meeting a little bit later because I am in Latin America. So for me, it's like early in the morning, like 2, 3 a.m. So, but I managed to listen to the last presentation on mycotoxins, and definitely they can also play an important role in the whole immunological process. So it's worth thinking about these things as well. And as to whether plant extracts would help, I'm not an expert in that field, so I have no experience with that. The only thing I could say, I'm sure that wouldn't harm the birds. So if you want to use them, maybe you can make your own experience based on what you are doing. But definitely mycotoxins can also play an important role in the fight against Newcastle disease. It's not only the vaccine, that's just a part of it. Okay. I don't know if Dr. Musho wants to add something to that.
Dr. Mucho would be happy with that. Dr. Mucho, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to answer. No, I totally agree. Yes, mycotoxins, they are usually never the main trigger point, but they're one of the predisposing factors, and they can become the trigger point when we have massive outbreaks, and we could as well assist to some like that. Now that we are, especially in Asia, there is the tendency to use more alternative raw materials to balance out the increased cost of soybean and corn. Sometimes we use DDGS and things like that, and those can come with a lot of mycotoxins, and in this case, they can become the main point. But usually speaking, in normal practice, they are one of the factors. Yes, I totally agree with that.
Okay. Now, I will continue with you, Mr. Mucho, since you started presenting. What level of zearalenone is acceptable in corn prior to use in feeds? And what is an acceptable zearalenone level in finished goods or finished feeds?
So I answered the question on the live. So just to give a reference value, I mean, let's start by saying that there is no safe level, right? Because I discussed about the synergism, I discussed about the relevance of having those cocktails of mycotoxins and the way they can increase their toxicity, okay? But just to give a practical overview, usually in Biomean as guidelines, we take 50 to 70 ppb as a threshold level. So we consider that a low risk. But especially layers and even breeders, you want to keep it as low as possible. So ideally, you want to be in that range, and if not below that range. And that also goes with the finished feed. So of course, if we take into consideration single commodities, we need to keep in mind that we are going to dilute them, right when we make the finished feed. So if we have a 50% corn diet, I'm just making an example, and then there is like a 200 ppb, and we're using 50%, we're going to have only 100 ppb in the finished feed. So my recommendation is for the finished feed. So stay as low as possible, ideally below 50 ppb. That would be a general rule of thumb.
Okay, thank you. Here's another question. You mentioned that mycotoxins have synergistic effect. Does this mean that if there are several mycotoxins present in the feeds, even at low levels, the animals will still experience the effects of mycotoxicosis? Additionally, is it possible that one mycotoxin exacerbates the effect of another mycotoxin?
Yes, correct. So that's basically the definition of synergism, is when the toxicity of one mycotoxin is increased by the presence of others. So yes, the mycotoxins, they can play together as a team and create and complicate the picture. And when we are talking about low doses, this becomes even more important because we have lower chances to see symptoms that could point us in the direction of mycotoxicosis when we are doing the differential diagnosis. So it's always important to screen the feed on a routine base and be aware of what is the mycotoxin contamination in the feed.
Thank you. My next question is for Dr. Budi. Dr. Budi, may I ask your advice for poultry farmers how nutraceuticals extracted from herbs identified to optimize stress and have antioxidants and immune modulator can help layer chickens in stress management and stress optimizer? Did you get the...
Yeah, in my presentation, I don't discuss on the feed additive issue because I focus on the nutrient required by the animals, so the nutrient. But there are several feed additive that has been in the market for many years, in fact more in the latest years, that can help to improve either immunity, to replace AGP in the feed. So many product available in the market. It is difficult because the mechanism of the product will be different with AGP, with antibiotic. So you have to make it clear that what the mechanism of each product can be different with the other. Let's talk about the probiotic will be different with the phytogenic component, or different with acidifier. So we have to be careful in selecting. I give advice that at the moment, you have to try in your own farm whether such product will be useful or not. But be careful during the trial, because you have to have the positive control trial beside the negative control. So my recommendation to farm, you may test it, but be careful in designing the trial because the conclusion can be misleading. So that's my advice regarding what the use of the possible feed additive. Over.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Budi. My next question is for Mr. Osmar Korkmaz. With many gut health products present in the market, what do you think is the most effective, or is there any combination to ensure gut integrity in the birds?
You know, laying hens have different period and different ages. It starts from the daily old chick to end of the pullet period, especially first 5 weeks of the pullet period. You need to use a different gut health product, and afterwards you need to maintain gut health between 6 weeks to end of the 16 weeks of age, and you need to use a maintenance product. There are several products are available in the market. During the production period, 18 weeks to 45 weeks of age, they are on the peaking period. You need to maintain them stay on the peak as much as you can. You need to avoid any stress factors in the gut. You need to use a different gut health products. And afterwards, after the peaking period, intestinal level is becoming older, and structure is changing. You need to increase. You need to support gut health structure. You need to use a different active ingredients. I can say that there is no one solution, and also we need to consider farm conditions and biosecurity conditions and challenges. And we can decide, depends on the ages, biosecurity conditions and farm conditions and challenges. There is no one solution. Solution can change regarding to problematics. Is my answer.
Okay, thank you. Now here is an interesting one for you also. Once the fatty liver is experienced by the birds, how can we solve this issue? What necessary steps or additives can be used to address this problem without affecting performance of the birds?
Normally, there are two steps. First step, we need to protect our animal until we face fatty liver syndrome, and after we fatty liver syndrome is outbreak, we can have a different strategy. Once we face fatty liver syndrome in the laying farms, first of all, we need to minimize challenging conditions. What are the challenging conditions? Of course, when high density and they are immobile, and we need to check and case system, heat stress, and they are triggering fatty liver syndrome, and other parameters we need to decrease. Source of the energy in the feed, especially if you use too much corn in the feed, it triggers fatty liver syndrome. We need to minimize. We need to use fat a part of the total metabolic energy. We need to check formulation. We need to make a balanced diet as much as we can. We need to use some lipotropinic agents, some vitamin B12 and methionine and tryptophan and choline and betaine and L-carnitine. That they are some liver supporter, and if we can make together, and within 1 or 2 months, things come back to normal.
Thank you. I have another question for Dr. Malo. I think this is something nice also. Why is my farm being hit with IBD always?
What is it? I didn't get the beginning of the question.
The farm always suffers from IBD infection. Why?
Which kind of farms?
A layer farm. It's a layer farm.
Oh, well, first of all, as I mentioned before, layers are more susceptible than broilers. So if you if you have a challenge with virulent IBD virus, it will be most likely that it will be more clear or more visible in the layer type of birds than in broiler type. The other reason is that IBD virus is a very, very resistant virus. Remember, these are we call them naked viruses. They don't have how do you call it, like an envelope, which makes them more resistant in the environment. And that's why these viruses are very difficult to destroy. So they just stay longer around the premises, and the combination of a stronger virus and a more susceptible bird will end up resulting in more outbreaks if you don't use a sound vaccination program, among other things, of course.
Okay, thank you. There's another one for Dr. Musio. Does using live bacteria totally replace toxin binders in the formulation? If yes, what inclusion rate do you recommend, assuming that there is a high mycotoxin level in the feeds?
I guess the question relates to the BBSH that introduces a probiotic. So those components that are listed at the end of the presentations, they are ingredients of mycofix, so you cannot use them as a single ingredient. So usually the best idea is to have a combination of adsorbents and those ingredients. So that's what mycofix is. So we still have a bentonite part that absorb aflatoxins and so on, and then we use those live bacteria and enzymes. So BBSH is only covering trichoticin mycotoxins. So it's only one of the ingredients. So we will still need the other components to capture the remaining mycotoxins. So as for the inclusion rate, depends on the mycotoxin contaminations. Usually we have guidelines, and I can take this off this call and I can be approached and I can give a more commercial introduction to the product. But usually we go from as little as 500 grams per ton of feed up to 2.5 kg per ton of feed. It always depends on the mycotoxin contamination and what mycotoxins are in there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
This is for Dr. Budi. Can calcium-phosphorus ratio imbalance cause lameness in layers? If yes, how?
Oh, okay. Personally, as nutritionist, I don't like to use the calcium to phosphorus ratio, because although the bone, they have the calcium phosphorus ratio, talking about the bone, but for feeding layer, I calculated on how much the calcium intake per day, including how much the phosphorus intake per day to produce the egg. So we don't calculate. Although some people may calculate that the ratio for the beginning of lay will be around 10 or less than 10, and after the old layer can be 12. But personally, I prefer to calculate how much the calcium intake per day, which is increasing during the for the older bird, while the phosphorus will be going down for the older bird. Because if you're putting too much calcium, the effect will be eggshell quality. If too much phosphorus, so the case of the lameness in layer is not normally related with cage layer fatigue. There's issue that the layer has been put it in the cage all the time. If the mobilization of the calcium inside of the body is not good enough, there are possibility that deficient of the calcium during egg formation. So there's a cause cage layer fatigue. There's a reason why many people in Europe try to raise layer not in the cages, but probably outside. But we can prevent the cage layer fatigue if you calculate properly how much, when the calcium have to be added in the diet, and what the calcium have to be accumulated during the midnight to make egg shell formation in the morning. So if you manage that one, I don't think any problem with the lameness, because lameness in layer normally with relative to the cage layer fatigue. So that's my explanation. I don't want to discuss more detail here because there's a separate chapter if you talk about the calcium and phosphorus in layer. Over.
Okay, thank you. My last question will be for Doc Jovic. Doc Jovic, being a consultant and a practitioner in the Philippines, are there existing farms already who are antibiotic free in layer farms? And when do you think are we going to achieve at least 50% of our layer farms to be antibiotic free? Do you have an idea?
As for my knowledge, as of my knowledge, there is an integrator who are pursuing the non-antibiotic ever program, and they are now, I think they are now rolling it out, and they're successful in some of their farms, and other farms are in my consultancy. We only use antibiotic on the first week. Others, especially during the laying for layers, we use phytochemicals or nutraceuticals to address coccidiosis, to address necrotic enteritis in the laying phase. Even with respiratory symptoms, we use herbs and essential oils.
Are they as effective
But
as
we still use antibiotics. We still use antibiotics, Doc Ben, if necessary. So if we have diagnosed that there really is a disease and there is a need for antibiotics, especially during the rearing period, we still give antibiotics.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Vic.